Hello, you're listening to Transformation Radio. I'm Deb Severson, and in just a few moments, I'll coach Dan, a young entrepreneur engaged in a startup with a technology company. And Dan is really grappling with a number of really philosophical questions. How do we really balance wearing the hat of vision and strategy and being tactical and really tangible, getting things done? He also raises an interesting question around the balance between optimism and realism. How do we continue to pursue, from a passionate perspective, what we want, and at the same time really keep a firm grip on the realities of money and you know, how much is too much and so on and so forth. So I hope you enjoy listening to this coaching conversation with Dan. Dan, thanks for joining me today. Go ahead and say a little bit about the topic that you've selected for our coaching conversation.
Sure. So the topic I wanted to talk about is when you're starting a new business, and I'll talk in a minute about what I'm starting and what I'm up to. When you're in the early stages of a new business, that balance between and the tension between the realism you need to have about what you're building, what's going to work, what's not going to work, and then the almost intentional, unrealistic side you need to have, or the suspension of disbelief you need to have of being able to imagine the business many steps ahead, imagine where you're going to take it, and kind of the tension between realism and optimism. Mm-hmm. And within that, there's kind of a tactical side to that in terms of how you plan and manage what you're doing. And then there's kind of a psychological or temperamental side as you just kind of manage yourself and your own psychology through those stages of starting something new.
Yeah.
And then just so a couple sentences of context about me and what I'm doing. So my own background is about a 20-plus year career in marketing and product development and product management in technology and digital companies. So I've worked in both small companies and startups. I've also worked in those types of roles in larger corporations, in media and search and interactive marketing. And about 4 months ago, started a company with a co-founder, a new company that's building out software and tools for career management. So it's a career management platform for marketers in technology. So a set of tools to help marketers and product people who work in the technology and software spaces to be more strategic about their careers and answer key questions like we think of it as kind of 3 key questions of when to make a move in their career and a job, where potentially to go and understand the market and the companies, and then how in terms of skills and roles what they should do. So that's what we're building, and where I'm in kind of the first stages of that startup.
Wow, that's exciting. So this is a really exciting time for you.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So where you mentioned balance,
Yep.
I'm going to just jump right in there.
Yep.
When you think about the balance between optimism and realism, where are you now? Where do you feel like you spend most of your time?
That's a good question. It's funny. It's hard for me to answer which one I'm closer to. I almost experience it more like, the concept in physics of like the particle that can be at 2 places at one time.
Yes.
I feel like I really live in that mode. It's more that there's planning and execution and time where one needs to be self-critical and be thinking about the feedback you're getting and what it's going to really take to do something. And then at the same time, in a pitch meeting or from a brainstorm perspective or from a motivating yourself perspective and having kind of the energy to take something that's small and imagine it at its next stage, that I also have to be able to live in that other space. So I almost feel like I experience them at the same time.
I almost, and I don't know if this is the right term, but it almost feels like it can feel a little schizophrenic.
Yes.
Yes?
That's probably a better, yeah. And it may be different for different people. Maybe some people's temperament is they tend to be more at one side and it's hard for them to get to the other. So maybe it's a strength that I can do both, but then you're right, the result of that is maybe a little feeling sometimes of schizophrenia, of being conscious of the switch. I guess I'm able to do both. It's more, I feel sometimes the question of when should I do which one and kind of switching between them.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Where, and I don't know if anxiety is the right word, but that's the word that's kind of coming up for me.
Right.
What creates the most anxiety for you at trying to really balance or juggle? Maybe it's more of juggling these two states.
Right. Yeah, it's funny. I think from a temperament perspective, just because I tend to be an even-keeled person, I probably don't experience it so far as too much emotional anxiety, because I think I'm pretty emotionally balanced, but I probably do experience it as intellectual anxiety, because to me it's almost like a rational question of which of these two states should I be in and what's the right one to be at the right time.
Mm-hmm. What do you believe today?
Today, it's funny. I keep answering the question the same way. Today's actually a perfect example of living in those two states. So I have I have a good degree of energy and enthusiasm, because this week we had a bunch of good meetings in terms of with some potential partners and customers, and there was some nice validation of some of the things that we're going to do, and so I have good energy around here's the next set of things we're going to do. At the same time, I have a whole set of tasks and a whole set of some design things around our product and things that are very tactical, and so then I'm forced to say, okay, I have to shut off some of this futuristic thinking around some of the roadmap and what we're going to do, and get very narrow and tactical about what are the few next steps and things that we're going to do. Yeah. So I come back to it.
Well, what's curious for me about this is that it almost seems like you are managing to balance them pretty well.
Right.
And emotionally, you're not feeling the tension, even though I think earlier you described it as there's this tension between these two sort of forces.
Right.
So where's your concern? Like, what is it that worries you about this?
Right. I guess my concern, I think that's a good point. I guess my concern is in these early stages so far, when so much of it is new, I actually feel like maybe the schizophrenia or doing both is okay and pretty natural, in that it's early enough that it almost feels obvious that, look, you're right at the beginning. You have to be able to kind of, throw the ball out ahead of yourself and understand what it's going to be. And at the same time, at a tactical level, some of the things that need to be done are the very beginning and obvious ones. So maybe that's why so far it hasn't manifested itself in a emotionally destabilizing way. I guess my concern is, I feel like if I look 3, 6, or 9 months down the road, I can see that now, as there is some more reality behind us, and there are a more complex set of next decisions that aren't as obvious as the ones to do now when you're right at the beginning.
Right.
I guess I look ahead and say, once there's, if I had to categorize it, there's more stuff actually behind us, there's more decisions, and there are more people involved. So having been involved in growing businesses within companies, once there's then more people on the team, there are more customers, then all of a sudden that tension is less about the very beginning of something and you just managing it for yourself. Mm-hmm. I guess as I'm talking about it, I think managing that tension for more people and more of an actual living entity, it feels like it starts to matter more and probably will feel more complicated. Mm-hmm. And there will be more tensions between how are you communicating this to other people? So are you setting other people's expectations appropriately? Yeah. And so all of a sudden you have this parallel universe, like your own mindset and how you view it, but then you have to think about how you do it with others.
This is really great. I mean, there's a couple things that I'm going to just paraphrase loosely, I suppose. One is that there's a way that you haven't really done this before, and so wearing so many different hats is new to you. Right. And so you're feeling some of that newness of, I have to be here, I have to be here, I have to be here. Right. I find myself wondering, are you, as you move forward in this startup, are you the CEO, or what's the role that you're going to play?
So my role right now, I'm actually the co-founder. So I have a partner, and we're both co-founders, and we've kind of started to have these discussions. One, we'll over time resolve if it's something that's structured as a partnership or that one of us is in charge. Mm-hmm.
And I could be way off here, so I'm going to just throw it out there. There's almost a way that it feels like you're being called, that whole strategizing and vision. There's a way that I'm wondering if your role isn't trying to be clarified in terms of your thinking out into that future space. What's the role I should play? Is it vision? Is it more people, right?
Right.
Where am I going to land in all of this in terms of
the
place I pay attention?
Right. It could be. I mean, I think that the question of kind of who does what is a question, and it's out there. However, I guess I think about it more as whether I was CEO or COO or however you did it. In both of those cases, it's still ultimately a management or vision setting role within the context of what we're doing. So sure, there's a difference between kind of the 1 and 2 in that sense, but I think I think of it more, and to your point earlier about this being a new thing, it's true. I've done some of these startup and product and kind of business building activities in a broader context of a wider company. But in that context, there is some other structure around you of expectations, and you're working on kind of a little more contained problem within it. So I think you're right. The first thing you said, I thought maybe resonated a little more than the role part of it, because I think having, again, whether it's me and a partner, having that responsibility for the whole part of it in that sense is the part that maybe is different than what I've done before.
Yeah. Well, so it's interesting. So there's a newness here, which is going to always feel a little different, right? Just because you're not used to being in that position. There is something, as you said, even though the partner situation is that you're starting to have conversations around the role. I'm going to just ask, what do you see yourself? I mean, more in terms of the person that does hold the vision. Do you find yourself living in that place of essence and vision and inspiration more than tactics and process? And tell me what's more true for you.
It's hard for me to answer that question, because actually one of the reasons I chose to go start something and be at a stage in my career of having my own business and starting a company from the beginning was, having done pieces of those things at other points in my career, I actually felt like in starting a small company, again, yourself or with a partner, whatever that kind of small group or configuration is, what I liked about that is at the beginning you get to do both. So I liked actually the doing both of it. So to me, that's why in my career I actually worked at larger companies and a few corporations earlier in my career, and over the last number of years before starting something, actually my last 3 companies were both 100 people or fewer. So they were already on the smaller side. And I think that gravitated me more towards realizing, by doing something smaller and ultimately by being there at the and that's why I was kind of saying in a way the CEO role in a way wasn't, that's a question but is not as much a piece of it. By being at the beginning and being in the first few people, whatever the exact roles end up being, that's actually why I chose it. And it's interesting as you ask it, I hadn't thought of it exactly that way, but you saying it kind of brings it to light. I actually think that's one of the reasons I did this, and actually one of the things I'm really enjoying about it, which is I like being at the kind of on the bridge of the ship, or so to speak, of the thinking about the vision, thinking about the whole business, and thinking about the whole strategy. But as someone who's I did management consulting early in my career, I don't like just thinking about strategy and handing that off to someone. I've been a management consultant. I've been in strategic planning. I like building.
All of it.
I do like all of it. I that's why I gravitated towards product and product management. I like building things. I like working with development teams. It's also why I like doing product management in smaller companies, because even product management in a larger company can be specifications and requirements that get thrown over a wall to someone else to build it. So I like doing both.
So for you, there's a way that the question that you're raising about the balance between the two. The reality is you like this chaotic state.
Right.
You like holding all of it,
right.
The wholeness of it. And it still has me go back to, so what's the main concern?
Right. And the funny thing you say about the holding the both, I mean, one thing that I've often seen, again, this is the first time really going through it myself, but something I've heard of from many other entrepreneurs or people who started companies that rings true is there's a whole set of people where they like that first stage, and actually when it gets to a certain size where it's time for roles and separation, they say, okay, not as much for me. I want to go back to that chaotic creative state. So we'll see. For me, I don't know if that will be my pattern, if it's something I stay with, if it's something that the experience is great, but the chaotic state can be tough, so maybe I won't want to go back to it. But there's something that rings true of that to me. Companies are different from 0 to 10 people to 10 to 50, 50 to 100, 100. Each of those stages has its own characteristic. So yeah, as you mentioned, the idea of liking that chaotic state, I could see myself being someone who, and again,
it's very thrilling.
Every company has its own path. Like I don't know if ours would be that big, but yes, there's something I like of to the beginning of that.
So
I didn't answer your question about the.
And I'm intrigued by that a bit, in that there's a way that this actually suits you beautifully,
right?
And there's a way that there's something that you're you have some hesitancy or uncertainty about whether you can hold both of those in some way.
Right. Yeah, maybe my hesitancy, as you were saying, kind of what's the concern within it. I think my hesitancy more is really just having not taken it to some of these stages. My hesitancy is more around those next stages where balance. I mean, maybe it's the transition from some form of the very beginning, which is very chaotic in the formation and formless. There's not that many people involved, and again, that's why I come back to like the role part when you ask that question. To me, that didn't feel like the tension, because when it's just a few people, whatever they're doing, it's just a few people, and if it's the right team, with the right team and partners, the roles tend to not matter as much at the beginning, because you're actually, if you're with the right team, you guys organically are working within that chaos,
so maybe
and you're complementary.
To the roles a bit.
So exactly. So then at some point there's the roles, and then maybe it's the transition from, I know I'm liking the stage that it is now. I know from past experience that, somewhere out there is a big company that this may or may not ever be that I don't like to work at. And then the interesting question is, what are the stages and transitions along the way? And what are anything even up to 100 people, and, could be a few years of this, is still relatively small and chaotic. Mm-hmm. But even the difference between the first 3 people and 7 people is different, because then there just starts to be a little bit more questions of everything from the. It's funny you brought up roles, which I hadn't thought a lot about, which is a factor too. But even coming back to the thing I started on of the realism versus the vision, to me that quickly becomes a tension. And I think my own experience of in my last couple roles of being in companies that were not we're not this small, but we're still kind of sub 100 person companies, and being on the management team of those companies, I saw that in sometimes too. I saw that the CEOs that I worked for, I recognized in working for them that there was sometimes a tension, and being responsible for product and being responsible for building the things we said we were going to do. Mm-hmm. The tension was very real between, well, how far ahead of us are we throwing the ball? How much ahead of us are we promising things to customers? What is the tension between vision and creativity and execution? So as we talk about it, maybe I'm also taking from my last couple experiences, living that tension in a larger organization. I'm probably really enjoying the stage, because there's a whole set of that tension that's released because we're so early, where you're in a pilot stage. As long as you're in an early stage, that as long as there's a degree of transparency and honesty with your customers and everybody about where you are, that tension doesn't exist as much, because you're at the beginning, and maybe I'm feeling somewhere in between this and that is kind of the tension that I've lived in the past of those companies.
And I'm wondering if some of it isn't that there's, for you, because of some of your other experiences and how much you like the chaotic state, there may also be a little bit of fear, might be too strong of a word, but about form.
Yep.
In other words, as it moves into form, then that's when you really have this tension between the two.
Right.
Right.
And what do you mean by form?
Well, I think about in 3 different sort of elements. There's vision, there's strategy, and there's tactics.
Okay.
And to me, vision is really formless in some ways.
Yep.
It's almost inspiration, just kind of raw essence of this is what we want to create. And then as we move to our strategy, it starts to take on a high-level form, and then we have to get down to the nuts and bolts of it.
Right.
This is a desk.
Yeah.
Right. So I almost wonder if you, because you like that front end so much, where it's still more vision and strategy, kind of at that front end.
Right.
A little concerned about, so do I even want to be in this formed organization?
Right. And I think that's right. And I think another thing, when you've asked me a couple of times, like, well, what I'm concerned about, and so I've been trying to figure out, like, yes, I like this zone, but it's not, obviously there's things I'm concerned about.
But there's something at the core of all this question.
So I think one core, as we're talking about it, is if I look at myself and I look at some of my strengths and weaknesses, I'm one of those people, some people are good at starting things or the beginning phase, but you're not always good at following through as much as you'd want. So I think if I'm being self-critical or looking at what concerns me is, obviously in the general sense, I follow through and I do things, or I've been generally successful, but I think sometimes as someone who does like that first creative part, who does like thinking what all the different options are, I think there's a way in which and it's funny, I'm just thinking as I'm saying this, as someone who's managed product and done product development, I think from a just structural perspective, I have, been successful building things and executing things, but at a deeper level, emotionally and in just different things I've done, I probably do tend more towards the person who thinks of things and starts things than the person who they're definitely following all the detail till the end, if I have to put myself at one end of that spectrum.
Yeah.
So maybe what I'm feeling a little bit is the tension of, okay, here's something where, sure, maybe if this would grow really big, I would want to go, back to the beginning of something small, but, we're a long way from that. The bigger concern is more it's going to be important to be able to go from the vision to the strategy to the form, as you were saying, and make sure I can execute and do this stuff and not let myself get caught too much on the vision stuff and need to execute to build something.
That's really where the balance challenge is for you, because and you're a little worried about getting too mired in the weeds around the tactics, because it's not what you love so much.
Right.
And you have the responsibility as the co-founder of this company. Somebody has to also have their eye on that level of detail. Right.
And then even roles-wise, you mentioned this earlier, again, even in the co-founder relationship, my of the two of us, my skill set and background is a little more on the product and technology side. So we're sharing the vision and the strategy, but if you look at our backgrounds, my partner's is more on the external and marketing and partnership and kind of network side, and mine is more on the in sales, and mine is more on the product and technology side, so I have a little more the responsibility for some of that tactical execution.
Yeah. So one of the places for you to think through now is, and I'm going to leave you with more of an inquiry than really an action item. It's really, and help me form this out so we get the right thing.
Yeah.
There's something for you about what is that next step in ensuring that the tactical needs will be met for this company.
Right.
I don't know if that's exactly right. You tell me.
Right. It's funny, as a practical matter, both myself and my partner were pretty disciplined from a tactical and work planning perspective. So I don't have a concern. This isn't one of these cases where I could be sitting here saying, look, my concern is we both love brainstorming and we both have great ideas, but
That's
are we really?
it.
Yeah, so we're pretty good and we've been executing pretty well in terms of actual prioritization and work plan. So at the tactical, kind of on the ground, it's not a tactical concern that it's really not going to happen. It's probably more, looking at our conversation, it's probably a little more at the temperament or emotional or psychological level. Like the work's we're gonna do it.
Yeah.
I think it's at a subtler level of, are we going to do it well or very well? Are we going to balance it the right? Are we going to balance it the right way? How am I going to, I guess, navigate it? And again, some of it may be less around the execution, maybe more around the internal emotional state of maybe again, tactically, I believe we're doing it, we're going to do it, but that doesn't mean you don't have some self-doubt in there somewhere, from other experiences, from other things. So it's less a direct, wow, we need to come up with some mechanisms to make sure we're going to do our planning and our execution, because we're pretty good at that. We've got our mechanisms and our structure. I think it's probably at that subtler level.
So think about for yourself, for you to be able to really answer the deeper question that you have, or the thing that's been, I don't think it's a deep concern, but I think there's something that you're kind of sitting with that's making you feel slightly uncomfortable. Right. Let's say that.
Right.
So what is that internal question that you've got to grapple with?
Yeah, I think the internal question, at some level, it's one where, some of this stuff is around, sometimes it's less around the answer and more around the self-awareness. So even in this conversation, I feel like at the beginning I already had a sense of, I had a sense of this topic and I had a sense of this tension. Even just through this conversation, it's kind of peeled back a couple layers of it that don't necessarily turn into an action item of, well, I need to do this kind of planning, or I need to figure out this way to manage my mental state. But I guess just from a self-awareness perspective, being able to kind of peel back a few of those layers and kind of understand, or kind of put a finger on, oh, that's what you mean when you say you're uncomfortable. It's this self-doubt around this kind of execution. Or it's this realization that one of the reasons you wanted to do this was to be at this early state where you could do both, and that's going to change over time, so pay attention to that. Mm-hmm. So I don't know, maybe upon more reflection I would get a little more tactical with it, but I actually feel like it's almost like kind of shown a light on or put into focus, something that maybe the better analogy is like blurry versus focus, like something that I had a sense of like, here's this overall thing I'm feeling that I'm aware of, sharpening the focus on here's a few of the subcomponents of that. Right. I almost feel like just paying attention to those things and being aware of them is helpful. And it may also be that I don't feel like there's big structure or action item at this moment, but it could be these are things that, 4 months from now when something gets to a next stage or where people are involved.
You're going to want to be aware of it.
Yeah, these do become things where all of a sudden we could be having this conversation and there might be some very specific, like, well, wait a minute, how are you going to communicate this to this person or something like that? That's great.
It is a really big question, I think, that you raised. And I know you and I talked briefly at the beginning of our time together. It's not just for startups. Right. I've been in business for 12 years now, and I still grapple with the question, how do I balance those pieces? How do I ensure that I'm being realistic and tactical and a good steward for the company, and at the same time I don't lose that bigger vision, that bigger picture.
Right.
So thanks for your time today.
Good, thanks. I really enjoyed the discussion. Thank you.